Immigration is good, but it's a problem when they don't speak English.
Oh, I already know I don't like those.
Fortunately, we have a solution.
Allow immigrants to learn English at elementary schools.
I'm not against it, but I thought they were already doing that.
They're not in here. They're not here. So this will help them learn the basics so they can integrate flawlessly in America.
So they would be in school with the elementary students at the same time?
So just to double up, like, so we can save pay on like the teachers to.
I just say no.
I mean, learning with children might be a little weird, but
Maybe children could learn life experience from the older people.
No, thank you.
I wouldn't feel safe with my kids with adults.
Well, we have teachers in the classroom and security and officers.
Would you install like TSA metal detectors for individuals like that come into the classroom?
Why do you say that?
I'm just saying, I don't know.
Individuals
He
like
looks
him
really
or
nice.
the kid right here?
That guy makes me nervous. That guy looks like he wants to blow the classroom up. I wouldn't be safe.
No, I don't think you'd have. I don't think you would do that.
He's here to learn English.
How do you know?
He's just trying to learn English.
How do you know?
That's a funny bit, but yes. You know, in our society right now, by the way, welcome to the program, folks. We are seeing more and more and more of our country invaded by people who have a culture completely different than ours in the United States of America that regularly now get in the streets and chant death to America. Same people in Canada, death to America, or in Germany, death to Germany. You should recognize that as a trend, and that's why you need to remember that history does repeat itself. And so since we've been working hard on a series, Understanding Psychological Warfare, we're just going to take a break. And we're going to, in this program, talk about some forgotten history, a Christian versus Muslim war that you were never told about. It's a great story. Make sure you pay attention, because this is one worth learning. Also to understand that, well, on the turn of a name or the twist of a name or a twist of a story, that your history, the world's history, can be completely rewritten to mean something that it didn't really stand for. So share this program. Today's program is brought to you by the fine folks at Goldco. Here's what I'm asking you to do. Please go to jovanlovesgold.com. Just request your free gold and silver kit today, because now is the time to protect your money with gold and silver. Folks, it's just a feed your brain proposition. You might even qualify to get to, $10,000 in free silver, depending upon your count. Just get the information. Cover your assets. I'm just telling you, it's coming. Anyway, today's program is going to be a very interesting one. You might not know history as much as you know history, but why it's relevant is because if you don't understand history, you are absolutely doomed to repeat it. And that is true. And we're going through it right now. And I just want you to kind of understand what's going on and what's happened in the past, so you can maybe clearly see an understanding that what could be allowed to happen in the future. Share this program. We'll get started right after this.
Warning. The following program has been rated Gilligaff and is intended for open-minded audiences. If the truth offends you, or if you are allergic to focused intensity, intellectual athleticism, or the occasional F-bomb or even irreverent humor, please switch off now. If your delicate sensibilities need to be worried about or addressed, might we recommend the Underwater Basket Weaving channel to you? Otherwise, sit back, enjoy the wisdom, insight, and wicked sense of humor.
Cut the crap. How many times a day do you want to say that to politicians, the elite, the loony liberals, the fake news media, and the gender-confused emotional socialist snowflake crowd? Cut the crap is your secret weapon for fighting for our freedoms and our great republic. It all begins with a massive mental enema, freeing you from the toxic news and politically correct views, which constipate your consciousness with stinking thinking. Your host, Jovan Hutton Pulitzer. He's known for calling out politicians and telling them to cut the crap. You've seen him on virtually every television network and listened to to him on Coast to Coast Radio. And now he's here to help you learn to fight for America. Culture, race, and American politics. They all have one thing in common. They all need to cut the crap. Now, here's your host, Jovan Hutton Pulitzer.
Okay, guys, we're going to go on a history tour, and we're going to deal with some forgotten history. It's a story of Christian versus Muslim war that you probably were never told about, or you might at least not know the true details. Every single day, you are seeing in our country, our precious, great, right, constitutional republic, people on the streets in our own country chanting death to America, Muslim-based hate. And one thing that has happened is our floodgates have kind of opened up into our country during the last Biden administration. And they let millions and millions and millions of people come into our country that literally hate our country. Well, from a historic standpoint, Western culture has been here before. Now, my job is to make you the smartest patriot in the room. I could talk about the DC pipe bomber. That's trending now. Okay, do you think we'll ever find any information? We're only as good as our politicians. Or I could talk about, Mike Lindell announcing running for governor of Minnesota. Okay. But it's politics. And many times politicians will lie to our faces, or lie and then get elected as a politician. It's the way it is, right? In order to understand how this impacts all of us and how it impacts the globe when we get weak politicians in, or politicians that willingly lie just to gain popularity, or politicians that are on the take, you need to understand what's happened in history when those same things have happened to kingdoms and histories back in time. Now, if you followed me for a while, this probably is 5 years ago when I originally did it, I showed you a painting in my home of which I did an additional painting of. It's where I was kind of trying to perfect my painting skills. And it was this particular piece of art. And this particular piece of art, it goes back in time. It's a museum piece. It goes back in time into the 700s, into the 8th century. Now, the fellow there, you'll see the two fellows, and we'll just use this as a great analogy. On the left is the Christian fellow. On the right is the Muslim fellow. And this was a deciding battle that ultimately decided even if Western countries could even be, done. Now, what you need to know about this photo is the fellow on the left is Charles Martel. That's my great-grandfather. So to first understand this battle, I'm going to take you back in my life, close to 50 generations, and we'll go back to my great-grandfather, who rose out of nowhere to change the course of history to make sure that all of our Western countries that you enjoy now were not Muslim countries. Now, I'm doing this so you understand a basis. Then after that period in 8th century, I'm going to jump forward almost double the time to the 15th century. I'm going to tell you another story. This story you may not have heard, which will help you understand kind of how long the Muslim invasions have been going on. So where we're going to start is I'm going to show you a video first. Okay, let me pull it up on my screen. I'm going to show you a video first. Very informative, that will help you kind of understand way back when Western civilization, we'll call it, was truly being formed into what it is. What was going on? Okay, what was going on? And so this is kind of a video tour of the history, ironically, of my family that had to deal with this.
In the year 732 AD, 40,000 Muslim warriors stood poised to conquer all of Christian Europe. Only one man stood between them and total victory. His name was Charles Martel, the Hammer. And what happened next on a muddy battlefield near Tours, France, would shape the next 300 years of world history. This is the story of how a single battle saved Christianity, forged modern Europe, and created the world as we know it today. If this is your first time here, welcome to the channel. Hit subscribe and drop your location in the comments so we know where our audience is tuning in from. To understand why this battle mattered, we need to go back 18 years earlier, to the year 714 AD. North African Moors, Muslim invaders from the rapidly expanding Islamic Caliphate, launched their assault on Spain. By 724, they had conquered 3/4 of the Iberian Peninsula. Christian kingdoms fell like dominoes. But Spain wasn't enough. Between 724 and 726, Muslim forces crossed the Pyrenees Mountains and invaded southern France, specifically the province of Aquitaine. Towns burned, churches were destroyed, monasteries and convents fell to the sword. By 728, the danger to Christian Europe had become existential. If France fell, there would be nothing stopping the Islamic armies from sweeping across all of Europe, Germany, Italy, even Rome itself. One man saw the danger. One man refused to let Europe fall. His name was Charles, son of Pepin II, born around 686 AD to a nobleman and his mistress. Charles was illegitimate in the eyes of the church. He had no real support, no army, no crown. But he had something more powerful, an unshakable belief that God had chosen him to save Christianity. Charles faced an impossible problem. To defeat 40,000 battle-hardened Muslim warriors, he would need an army, but he was surrounded by enemies. Enter Duke Odo of Aquitaine, his father's former enemy. For nearly a decade, Odo had been fighting the Muslim invasions alone, and he was losing. In an unprecedented move, Odo came to Charles and offered peace. Charles accepted. But both men knew, even their combined forces weren't enough. So Charles did something no European leader had ever done. He reached out to everyone, even his father's bitterest enemies. The Saxons, the Burgundians, the Bavarians, the Alemanni, the Frisians, even the Lombards. Charles forged a 6-nation coalition, the first of its kind in European history. Pope Constantine blessed this alliance, giving it holy legitimacy. But then Constantine died. The new Pope, Gregory II, despised Charles. He believed the Franks were pagans wearing Christian masks. Suddenly, Charles and his alliance stood alone. Charles had another problem, one even more dangerous than papal politics. His stepmother Plectrude wanted him dead. When Charles's father Pepin died, she saw her chance to eliminate this illegitimate threat to her power. But she couldn't just assassinate him. That would create chaos with the church and the alliance. Charles needed something to unite his fractured alliance, something sacred, something powerful enough to overcome politics, hatred, and fear. That's when Archbishop Milo, Charles's brother-in-law, summoned him to Aachen and changed everything. Milo presented Charles with 2 artifacts. First, the papal banner of Constantine, the official flag of the Pope himself, granting divine authority to the alliance. And second, according to legend, the Spear of Destiny. This was supposedly the very spear that pierced Christ's side on Golgotha, and legend said that whoever possessed it would be invincible in battle. This will give you speed in victory, Milo told him. This will galvanize your alliance. This will give you the spirit and will to win your great battle. Dramatic medieval painting of Archbishop Milo in ornate religious robes, handing the glowing spear to Charles Martel in a grand cathedral, divine light streaming through stained glass windows illuminating both figures. Charles held the Spear of Destiny high before his alliance leaders. Even the pagan Frisians, led by Bobo, son of Redbad, saw something in Charles that day. They saw a man who could change the face of Europe. But Charles still faced an impossible military reality. He had maybe 20,000 to 25,000 men. His enemy, Abdul al-Rahman, the Governor-General of Islamic Spain, commanded 40,000 battle-tested warriors, and more were coming every day. Charles Martel knew he couldn't win a fair fight, so he decided not to fight fair. He devised a 3-part strategy that would require perfect execution, incredible discipline, and a little bit of divine intervention. First, choose the perfect battlefield, ground where his smaller force could neutralize the Muslim numerical advantage. Second, deceive Abdul al-Rahman about the size and location of his forces. Make the enemy believe they faced only a token resistance. Third, win so decisively that even his alliance members, former enemies, would never dare betray him. For a month, Charles played his game. Abdul al-Rahman's spies probed the Frankish positions constantly, and Charles made sure they saw exactly what he wanted them to see. About 5,000 men, maybe a few cavalry. Nothing impressive. What the spies didn't see were the 5,000 archers hidden in the forests, the cavalry concealed behind the hills, the dug-in infantry positions camouflaged and waiting. Then something strange happened. Charles's wife, Swanhilda, daughter of Duke Theudebert of Bavaria, had a vision. She was considered a seer by some, a witch by others. She prophesied 12 days of rain. And for 12 days, it rained. The rivers swelled, the fields turned to mud. It was October, and winter was approaching. Any rational military commander would have retreated. On the 13th day, the rain stopped, and according to Charles and Swanhilda, one single beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating a specific valley near Tours. Charles saw this as a sign from God. This was where the battle would be fought. And when military historians later analysed the site, they realised something incredible. It was the most perfect defensive position in the entire region. October 10th, 732 AD. For 7 days, the two armies stared at each other across that muddy valley. Abdul al-Rahman was confident. He had the numbers. He had the momentum of 18 years of conquest. He had God on his side, or so he believed. Charles waited, patient, disciplined, letting the mud deepen, letting his enemy's confidence grow into arrogance. On the 8th day, Abdul al-Rahman attacked. The Muslim cavalry, pride of their military tradition, thundered across that valley. Standard procedure. Cavalry first, break the enemy line, then follow with infantry to finish them off. It had worked in Spain. It had worked in Aquitaine. But the mud changed everything. The charging horses bogged down. Formation broke apart. And then Charles's archers, 5,000 of them hidden in the forests, opened fire. Arab scholars later wrote that 5,000 Muslim cavalry, horse and rider, died in the first 25 to 30 minutes of battle. Abdul al-Rahman couldn't believe it. He sent wave after wave of cavalry. Each time they bogged down in the mud. Each time the Christian archers cut them down like wheat before a scythe. Then came the infantry assault. Thousands of Muslim soldiers on foot, advancing through that mud-soaked killing field. They met the same fate. Arrows from the front, arrows from the flanks. They couldn't get close enough to engage. That's when Charles Martel released his infantry, the disciplined Frankish foot soldiers who had been dug in and waiting. They charged forward in perfect formation. And then the hammer fell. Charles's cavalry, hidden behind the hills this entire time, exploded onto the battlefield. They attacked along the woodline, encircling the Muslim forces from the flank. The Muslims were surrounded. River on one side, forest on another. Christian infantry in front. Christian cavalry on the flank. There was no escape. The slaughter was absolute. Arab chronicles called it Balat al-Shuhada, the highway of martyrs, because the dead stretched for miles, all the way from Tours to the Spanish border. Abdul al-Rahman himself fell in the fighting, killed by a Frankish soldier who never knew he'd just slain one of the most powerful military commanders in the Islamic world. Charles deliberately let some Muslims escape, wounded survivors who could carry a message back to Spain. Do not attack Christian Europe again. God is on our side. You cannot win. So fai norde. The Battle of Tours was over, but its consequences had just begun. Charles Martel had achieved the impossible. With a smaller force, through tactical genius and unwavering faith, he had defeated what many believed was the unstoppable army of Islam. Christian Europe was saved. The Frankish kingdom was secure. And Charles had proven that united, the fractured kingdoms of Europe could stand against any threat. But the legacy goes far deeper. Charles's victory established the precedent for European nation-states. His grandson Charlemagne would become the first Holy Roman Emperor, creating an empire that would shape Western civilization for 1,000 years. The Battle of Tours preserved not just Christianity, but the entire cultural framework that would become the foundation of the modern West. Without Charles Martel, there might have been no Renaissance, no Age of Exploration, no Enlightenment. Today, over 100 nations can trace their origins to the post-colonial European powers that emerged from this preserved Christian civilization. The language you're speaking, the government systems we use, the cultural values we debate, all of it might have been radically different if 40,000 Muslim warriors had conquered France in 732 AD. Charles Martel, the hammer, struck a blow that echoed through the centuries. He was never crowned king in his lifetime, but he shaped history more than most monarchs ever could. This was forgotten history. But it's history that built the world. If you found this story...
So I wanted to share that history with you because I've talked about it before, and I've shown you this, and of course I'm giving you my family's history. This, if we go back 50 generations, is my great-grandfather and what he fought. Now, the battle rages on today. It's a lot different now because it's fought electronically. It's fought psychologically, right? The battle is the same, though. Our civilization over and over has been attacked and attempt to destroy. And every time the big attempt to destroy comes, they try to deploy new techniques to basically take over Western civilization. If you can even see art in my different places or studios of my family that have been in this. And so naturally, it's fallen upon me in my particular generation to do what I do, to fight this very same fight. It's just different weapons, all strategy, all tactics, but you're fighting what is perceived as a massive, massive army or coup, and you've got to use basically very specialized techniques, weapons, my particular weapons, forensic science, to make sure you don't get defeated. And it's always the same battle over and over. You're battling something that's been in place, that wants to dominate, that wants to conquer. In the Muslim piece, and that's why I carried this first piece, and then I'm going to give you the second piece. That particular time in my family's history, and ironically in your history because you're here today, most likely in the United States of America, that particular battle was fought during what was called the Islamic expansion period. That's what that was, the Islamic expansion period. Now, our world, our Western civilization have been through this many times. So you had the expansion period, then you had the conquest period. The conquest that went on was when the Muslims conquered Syria and conquered what is now the Middle East you know of, Egypt, North Africa. Then it basically went to the Sasanian Empire. That's the Persian Empire. And it had its battled, and they conquered there. Then you had the further expansion where they went from North Africa. Now that's just a short leap if you know your how the world's laid out. They're right there into the Atlantic. And so they bopped right over the Iberian Peninsula. And then, of course, they went the opposite direction as well. They went into Central Asia, and they went into what was known as the Indian frontier. This kept on repeating and kept on repeating and kept on repeating. The Abbasids, the Fatimids, the Seljuks, all of this happened. This was during the Byzantine time. This is what that led to the Crusader period. You know about the Crusaders, right? And then you had the Ottoman Empire, which of course is Muslim. It kind of went on. And most people don't know their history. There were battles with Russia, Venice, the Habsburgs, part of my family, again later, the Safavids, all of these attacks. But those attacks, the Muslims did something different. They changed their techniques from old times, and they started to create and foster internal revolts. Now, does that sound familiar? Internal revolts. They basically got their people, their warriors inside these other countries and started trying to take over these countries from the inside. That should sound very familiar to you. This is exactly what they've done. It has affected every single, 100%, every single major civilization. 100%. So what I want to do is I want to share with you a story that, whether you know it or not, kind of like modern Dearborn, Michigan, pay attention. Because remember, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. And history does repeat itself. It's just we're involved in a little different battle. And as you know, our government did it to us. When you have all of this Muslim invasion taking place right now, and I'm not saying all Muslims are bad, just like not all Christians are bad, just like all Jews are not bad. It's when you're radicalized and you have an agenda to destroy. It's a cancer. But when your own people submit and allow it to happen and bring it to your doorstep, it gets worse and worse. Let me remind you, and I ask for your support. I've got to have your support, folks. Let me remind you, in my generation, because you're watching my family history, in my generation, the actual battle that I have to fight.
Not fixing 2020 will damn our nation forever. The historic Maricopa County full forensic audit effort processed 20,895,610 digital and forensic images of varying formats, resulted in 208 million individual evidence-proof files. The system processed over 58 billion forensic measurements, resulting in over 2 trillion individual base computations. No hopium, no hype, just hardcore forensic evidence. Please make sure the Maricopa County Full Forensic Audit Archives survive. Donate now. So if you want what happened in the 2020 election fixed, then please donate to protect and secure this historic evidence. We can't do it without you. We need you. America needs you. Our future needs you. Please donate now.
I'm telling you, it's the same way when my ancestors went around rounding up other communities, other people, other support. It takes a team to do it. History is always decided by those who push back on oppressive systems. Most of them believe they're chosen by God, which I believe. I believe you're chosen by God to be here. I talk about it all the time. I believe I'm chosen by God to do this battle. But it takes everybody understanding the tactic and what's going on. Because if you don't know how they do it to you, you cannot defend against it. That's why we need your help. Now, what I'm doing is I'm going to tell you another story. And I want to show you a little bit of a twist here of how important things in history that happened, frankly, to save your ass from being Muslim at the point of a spear or having your head cut off, which has now come to our shores. But I want you to think of the fact, because people don't connect the dots, where you've had the most Muslims imported into their nation. We hear it here in the United States. Death to America. They're chanting it in the streets. Our lawmakers are supporting it, letting it go. But you're hearing the same thing in Canada. They'll be in the streets chanting death to Canada. There'll be the same thing in Germany that's going on. Yeah. In Germany, you can have a Muslim rape little girls and not get a sentence, but you can have, or in the UK, you can have people go to jail for a social media posting. It's all about creating chaos, just like the teacher, I think in Ireland, that refuses to use pronouns, and in class, they've arrested him a couple times and let him out. In case you didn't get the story, when he still refuses to use pronouns, they just imprisoned him again for life. For life. The system's falling to this same tactic. And so that's why I'm going to share with you a story. And it's one of those combo stories. It's a direct personal story of a boy that saw what was coming and knew if you're going to save yourself, you got to save yourself because everybody else is capitulating. Think about that. In the UK, social media posts get you 2 years. This teacher refusing to acknowledge genders and pronouns, being in and out of jail. And just a few days ago, they arrested him again and imprisoned him for life for not acknowledging it. So we are at war. That's just the way it is. We are at war, okay? Now, what I'm asking you to understand is as I tell you this story, there's probably not much to chat about. Don't try to chat or get ahead or whatever. Just let the story unfold. And the reason I ask you to let the story unfold is I want you to understand that once again, history's repeating itself. Now, the first story I shared with you and my family was from about the year 700. So we're going to accelerate. We're just going to leap another whole same equal time period. We're going to get into the 15th century. And I'm just going to tell you a story in storytelling form of another one of these battles you might not have heard about. Now, this boy, he was born into land that actually never knew peace, ever. It was just tiny pauses between storms. Now, these storms were battles, okay? And so if you can imagine this country, you saw a little bit of it when you saw the first video. You got to the west lay the mountains. They're jagged, kind of like a broken wall. To the right, dark forest. And if you've ever lived in any kind of the mountains like I do, and you look out into the forest, it can be a bright sunny day, but the forest is always dark. Now, this particular land was a land that already had rumors and legends and all this other stuff going on. Now, to the south, once again, strategically, and I'll give you an example, my family to this day, 1,500 years later, we all still lay, every one of us, aligned with mountain and valley, flatland and river in a protected area. It's still the same for me to this day. Anyway, there was a really big river to one side. Now, on beyond that, protected by this was an empire who was going on to the battle and was going through this conquering stuff and thought they can do it. Now, this particular empire was, again, their banners was the crescent moon. And once again, it was Muslim invading hordes. Now, if you can imagine where this boy lived, you had to the north and to the east were kings, and all these different kings and communities called themselves Christian, right? They called themselves Christian. But at that time, there were all kinds of squirrels to chase, and everybody was trying to be more Christian than others. Sound familiar? Everybody was trying to be more perfect than others, and nobody was paying attention to what was happening on the grander scale. So these kings, let's just call them mayors in our time, right? Governors. They always fought. They were always scheming against each other. They were too divided and too self-absorbed to notice that something was knocking at their door on the frontier. Something that while it was knocking at the door, they couldn't even recognize in their own ranks that their faith, remember, we just come off a series basically showing you how you undermine faith, make you turn away from God, even your own values and morals. Well, this was going on too. And so this nation, these group of nations, right, were crumbling. Okay? Now, this is a true story, so just follow with me. Just listen to the story. Don't ask questions. Don't get ahead of it. There's a purpose for this, and I want you to understand it. Now, in the middle of all this battling and stuff going on, there was a poor area, principality, and it was just kind of a strip of earth, but it had always been associated with tons of blood being spilled over it, kind of like the gateway between these two things. But what it actually was, and it ended up being, was something worse. It ended up being another one of these hinges to history. When I showed you Martel, hinge to history. Everything hinged on that battle. And if that hinge would have been broken in the 700s, all of us would have surely been Muslim. There would have been any advances or civilizations, because that's not the Muslim way, etc. Now, if that hinge broke at this time, now we're 15th century, if that hinge broke at that time, what would happen is it would have opened the gates once again. We're talking 700+ years later from Charles Martel. All of Christian Europe would have fallen. Now, this little boy, he grew up knowing that, knowing what to be fearful of. Now, his father was a battle-hardened man, right? His father came from a time when people didn't live very long. But again, I told you about the skirmishes back and forth, who's right, who's wrong, and who all this, kind of like election integrity today, right? Same bullshit battles, skirmishes, all this back and forth. Well, that was kind of what was going on. And his father was a symbol of a great warrior. He remembers many times his father having to ride off into battle and fight. And it was such that the family, even at night, the father always slept with their swords and weapons beside them. That's how much was going on. So the boy basically, asked his father, why is this going on and what's going on? And his father at the time talked about, we got to stay strong in our faith. We've got to stay strong in our Christianity. And the real battle, what's going on, son, is not necessarily for our lands as much as it's for our faith. Now, his father always referred at the time, he would talk about St. George and protection, but he always talked about the great serpent that was kind of knocking at the door, the evil serpent that was knocking at the door. And just like in Charles Martel, the symbology that goes with it about you're either chosen by God to do this work or you're not. That's really what it comes down to. You're either accepting the fact that you're destined to be here at this moment in time to fight this battle or not. It really comes down to that. And so the father, I guess you could say, was a weapon of God. And this little boy kind of had that same attitude, kind of like a Trump attitude. We got to protect the nation. That I'm chosen by God to get here. So what happened is this kid's nation and the rulers around him that were, should we say, cross-squabbling, they got soft, right? They got soft. Now, the father is teaching the boy and ironically, I just want you to bring it to today's stuff that's going on. This father taught his young son, we must, no matter what, protect our borders, because if they invade our borders, everything we know about our culture, our faith, is going to go away. So he taught his son the most important lesson to know, that we're responsible for the people that are asleep while we're paying attention, but we've got to pay attention to the borders. And the boy always remembered this. Of course, he was this young boy. He didn't really understand. All he knew, right, at different times in his life already, that there were riders that came from the South. And these riders, he could vividly remember, they were wearing their silk garments. They had their scimitars, right? That's the Islamic sword. They were always smiling and polite, like they were peaceful. But what they did of the people is they demanded tribute. They demanded their way. We're going to come into your lands and we're going to change your lands. And because we're basically giving you the God you should have, you're going to pay us tribute. And so what the Muslim wanted in this conquering is they wanted gold and they wanted grain. Now, they had one other request. As they conquered these peoples, yeah, it's kind of like protection money. As they conquered these people, they wanted Christian boys. Part of their tribute is they demanded boys. Now, I want to remind you, in radical Muslim law, where they appear to be pious and everything else, it is totally okay to take sex slaves, and it is totally okay and approved, and you're not gay, to have sex continually with young boys and have a crop of young boys to have sex with. And so they specifically, I want to let you know, they specifically wanted circumcised boys. They wanted boys that not only were Christian, they wanted boys that carried the covenant, circumcision. And their plan was, we're going to make these boys forget their mother's faces and their father's name. And we're going to not only continually rape them and brainwash them, but we're going to turn them into fighters whose first loyalty is the Sultan. Brainwashing. Now, when the wars got really bad and his father was kind of isolated, the father began paying tribute. Right? All the nations were capitulating. Look, we got to capitulate. We got to allow them in. We'll take our religion and do it in secret, but we'll play like we're going along with their God and everything else because we don't want them to destroy us. There's just too many of them. And so his father's counselors basically said, look, it's better to go ahead and capitulate. We got to buy ourselves some time, because if we piss these great empire off, they're going to crush us. So who cares? Let them take a little. We've got all the rest. So the boy, lived in a household that he kind of watched all this taking place. He watched every time his father would have to drag out a chest of coins and gold, right? He watched as the invaders not only took the gold and took the grain and left people in poverty, raping their system. Sound familiar? Raping their system, right? This should sound exceptionally familiar to you. So this little boy saw the act of paying tribute, saw the act of capitulating, saw his father trying to stay away, and watched as children were taken away as sex slaves for these Muslim invaders. He watched every time with it being horror, and he kind of watched the very slow decline of his own country and civilization. So if we fast forward to this little boy who's going to be now in his teens, the Muslims realized that maybe his father was a problem. And so now the Muslims wanted more. They wanted guarantees that the father would shut the hell up. Yeah, cancel culture. And so in more guarantees to do this, they demanded of his father. We're hearing rumblings because, it's just like during the pandemic, folks. They encourage, people to get along, don't make any ruffles, and you actually end up having your own countrymen turn you in. You've experienced that. Countrymen turning against countrymen. But they knew the father possibly was a problem. And so what they did is they demanded his son. They demanded a hostage that would guarantee this father would stand down. Leverage. Now, the father was kind of betrayed by local politicians and other rulers and basically forced to do this. shamed into? Well, he finally gave over his son. So now this son, who is a teenager, becomes a captive of the Muslims. And yes, he was. He was used as a sex slave repeatedly, horribly raped by the Muslims. It was the way they did it. It was the way they broke their souls. It was the way they did it. And I'm going to share all of this with you, but please don't ask questions. Stay with the story. So this young teen, as he's being taken away, kind of thinking back to his nation and everything, basically sees his nation falling. He can see everything that his father told him. Protect this border, don't become soft, stand strong in your faith, never give it up, but you've got to beware. This is evil. It's slowly coming in. And so basically, as his country's behind him with churches and, where people were in many ways turning against Christianity because these invaders were lying, not willing to say they were Christian, he basically now enters a land as a captive where what he's seeing is marionettes and mosque. That's when everything around him shifted. Everything around him shifted. The language, the food changed, the prayers were different. He was forced to do every bit of it. Put out his prayer mat. He was forced to do every bit of it or die. And so outwardly, he was obedient. You got to remember there was a little bit different about this boy because technically he was a prince, right? For his people. And so he had, should we call it great discipline? He was strong. He wasn't, kind of like these snowflakes we've got today that have a flat tire, freak out, don't know what to do it. And so what they did is he was quiet. He remained obedient. And he was now taught that this prince must endure humiliation. Don't you think some of the stuff we're dealing with is humiliation? People walking into department stores right now in these cities saying a Christmas tree, that's halal, you got to get rid of it, demanding their laws. Well, it's humiliating, isn't it? And so what they did is they cut his hair. They forced him to dress in their garments. They told him, get ready for this, they told him that his homeland, he came from people that were illiterate, backwards, etc. Think how many academics, and this is why it should sound familiar, tell you we're illiterate, if you're conservative, you're backwards, etc. In his soul, though, he knew I've just got to kind of bide my time, get through this until I kind of have the right time, kind of unflinching, right? So what he chose to do is he chose to spring at the right time. He did not curse his captors out loud. He didn't spit on their floors or insult them or their faith, because that would only get him beat and raped and harmed more. He just kind of sat back and he watched and he observed and he learned these people. So during that time, he was able to learn how this particular empire that was conquering worked. Okay? And what it was this big grinding machine of death. Kill, 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 kill in the name of doing the right thing. And so he understood how the system, how they're able to conquer. One, they've got this big grinding machine of soldiers because there's no value on human life, and they worship death. So of course there's no value on human life. Behind it, to feed the machine, was a vast system of tax collectors, getting countries to pay them, just like even our own country in the United States of America still contributes to systems like this. Is still in place today, folks. how they used their judges to proclaim people were evil, and they basically turned people against people using spies. Okay? Now, the entire time to beat this into this child, or now a teenager, any of the captives, aside from the humiliation they were going through, their backs, they stripped their clothes to the backs. They would beat them to hell and back with welts and cuts. They would put them in chains. They would march them. They would march them back and forth across the country to destroy their spirit. And he was kind of smart enough to understand what the scribes were doing. And the scribes were just the Muslim scribes were just kind of keeping count of how many columns it took, how many people it took to, conquer a land. Of course, life had no value. This is kind of the same, it's the same as it ever was. It's going on now. That's why I'm doing this. But stay with me on the story, right? And I've already got 2 thumbs down. Thank you to my Muslim extremists that continue to watch me. Thank you. Anyway, so he understood how these people operate. He understood what it cost. He understood how many people they were willing to sacrifice, which was unlimited, to take over a country. He kind of just memorized it in his brain. Now, secretly, he stayed true to his faith. Same reason they killed Jews. You stay true to your faith. He would do the sign of the cross, right? Behind his shirt, he whispered prayers that his mother had taught him. His mother had taught him a prayer that basically said, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That was the prayer that he would continue to repeat to himself. And one night, a guard caught him worshiping his God, and the guard basically mused, says, what are you doing, little prince? Because they knew he was a prince. They knew his father was a great warrior, and this is how they were holding the father hostage. He kind of said, well, I have a pain right here, and my ribs hurt and whatever, and the guard kind of left and kind of walked on. Now, what happened is, and the boy being observant to understand what the enemy was, he learned and paid attention to the Arabic words. He learned the etiquette of the Sultan's court. He learned to ride with a bow. He learned how to handle the scimitar, the curved sword, etc. And as he started to learn and kind of follow in line, he wasn't, as it goes on, mistreated every day. He was almost forgotten. And that was his plan. Just forget about me. I'm blending in. Okay? What they were doing is they were trying to form him, a Christian child, in their image. Trying to enforce in him be compliant to the rules. Right? Etc. And this young kid learned about some of the stuff that was going on, that the ruler liked falconry and etc. And so he started to be looked at favorably. Now, the falcon guy that was doing it, he watched. If the falcon guy made a mistake and he went with an escort, right? He said that he would never, ever comply. He says, I am not going to comply. And if I ever get a chance to get to the other side of the river, and there's a point to telling this story, and there's a very important point to telling this story the way I'm telling it. Because too many people jump to conclusions. Too many people miss the message. And too many people don't get the point. And the point is, even if you're a zombie, you got to remember this. The point is how this formula works. Eventually, he's able to get across the river. He makes his way back to his father's city. It's in ruins. It's totally in ruins. Typically, he, if he'd been out with his father, he'd kind of smell the familiar smells of the village, he would smell it. Oh, you're getting close to town. It's kind of like driving at night. You would see the lights of a city. When he got into the city, what he smelled was burning flesh. What he saw was charred timbers. Now, the walls of the city were still standing, but they were kind of like these hollow shells of themselves with cracks in the wall. And an interesting thing happened when he encountered the people themselves, even though he had endured this, the people themselves, he had endured this. The people had become suspicious of each other. Comply with the system. Don't break any rules. Tell on everybody else. Kind of like 1984, the book, right? Well, he kind of saw why. What had happened is his father was dead, his elder brother was dead, and the leadership of the country had fallen. The leadership of the country had been taken over. And they had not died in battle. His father, who was a warrior, his elder brother, who also was a warrior, they didn't die in battle. They died because people in the town turned them in for blasphemy and heresy. And so the Muslim invaders came into the family's compound and murdered. And basically the very people that his father had always tried to protect from losing their ethics, their morals, etc., the people turned them in. They turned them over to the enemies. So he came back to a country where his own fellow countrymen and women and boys and everything else became enemy agents for the agenda to destroy them. It's kind of like in election integrity. I tell you about this all the time. They will lull you into you're doing great and good, but they actually made you warriors for the other side. So out along the family compound and stuff, vast graveyards where the nobles of that time had always buried their dead for generations. Now there was a new mound of earth. And it was literally hastily piled bodies, right? Of people that just wouldn't agree to the system. Now, the rumors were, what he heard from the rumors from the locals is that his father had been lured away, captured, blinded, buried alive, and that his brother had been mutilated and killed. It didn't matter what happened. The young prince returning to his land was never satisfied with the story, but he was smart enough to realize that his father was betrayed by his own countrymen. Let's call them the CIA. They went from being dedicated to their country and pledging their fealty to his father, but the very people that say, oh, we're this, we're that, we're like today, we're patriots, they're the ones that betrayed the father who was the warrior. And why? Because the invading country gave them favors. It was a way to buy favors. You're in the in crowd. Sound familiar? It was a way to buy favors if they turned on their fellow men. And so it wasn't foreign powers. It was his own community. And they were doing it just to buy favors. And so it happened that the boy met up with the priest. The priest was one of these priests at the time that would carry outwardly the old wooden cross around him. Peace, just, the priest, just capitulate, don't cause muck, etc. And he was looking out along what was going on. And the boy realized that his family wasn't saints. They didn't really fight to the bitter end. He realized that his father made a mistake capitulating. That was the bottom line. Yes, he got turned over to the Muslim hordes and horrible things happened to him. But he realized the reason he was in that predicament and the reason his country, his people, his villages, their empire was destroyed is because they made mistakes. They folded when they never should have folded. Of course, the priest is going to correct them. Well, all men are sinners, only one without sins. And he said, look, he told the priest who was, giving the regular sermon, no one's without sins, kind of excusing it. The young boy says, look, but there's a difference. There's a difference in dying in battle, being a warrior, not giving up. But there's something even worse, and that is being butchered by those who eat at your table. When you realize what's going on with us right now, when you realize what is going on with us right now, when you realize like Doge finds money that were given to USAID and they are supporting this attack of America, that's those that are butchering us while they dine at our table because we're paying for it. Pay attention, because history does repeat itself. But the prince had learned. And the prince told the priest, look, these guys to the south, and you're right, same shit, different day, they're wolves. They're killers. But our own dogs are the ones who opened the gate. Think about that for a minute. He's watching the destruction. He sees the destruction of his land. He sees it crumbling. People have walked away from their faith. People have capitulated. People have accepted as truth things they knew was not truth. And he's saying, I acknowledge those invaders to the south are wolves. But you know what? We did this to ourselves because our very own dogs opened the gates. So the priest naturally asked him, acknowledging him, well, what will we do, my lord? And the prince said, pay attention, I will close it with iron. I will close my borders with iron. I will teach every traitor what it means to crucify trust. Remember, right? Politicians, leaders, these arguing kings were so weak that they thought they were favored. They're taking money from the Sultan and they're tattling on people and don't even realize they're throwing over their own culture. He says, I will teach these traitors what it means to crucify one's trust. So the prince goes to war. Now, the first war he fights is not against the people carrying the crescent flags, not against the Muslim. It was battling his own internal corruption first. It's where we are. We have to battle in our time, the ways of our time. We have to battle internal corruption first. So he summoned all the people that were still around that were capitulating, that he knew was responsible for this. They showed up, right? Dressed in their silks and their furs. Their blank kind of libtard face looking at this ruler has now appeared because he's now the rightful ruler. Some of them remembered he was sent away as a child, sent to the south with these hordes as a hostage. Now, some of these people judged him wrongly because they thought that all of the hardship that he suffered would make him pliable, that he would bend to, just like they had bent. That's what they do. They make him pliable. So he brought him in. He offered him a feast. The tables were just loaded with a incredible feast. You think about, things at the time, roasted meat, spiced wine, honey cakes, musicians played. Everybody's laughing their ass off, having a great time. Right? And when their cups were filled and their bellies warm, he stood up to give a toast. He said, "Many of you dined with my father. You spoke of loyalty. You kissed his hand, promising to be loyal." It's some of this patriot stuff. You shared his salt. You shared his bread. And then you delivered him to his enemies. Everybody got silent, as you can imagine. Kind of think that storms brewing outside, right? Storms crashing in the shutters and everything else in this, because he had to deal with the inside corruption first. And he basically said, a country this small cannot survive with treachery among it. He basically told them, we're just a narrow strip of earth between two big powers that would gladly swallow us as a whole. If our own nobles, think politicians, if our own nobles will sell us out, who will remain to fight? Of course, when they're fat in bellies and drunk, nobody answered. Everybody just kind of stared. A few of them kind of allowed a grin, like, what are you going to do about it? You're nothing. He gave a small kind of regretful nod, because he realized exactly what their answer would be all along. And about that time, the doors to the dining hall opened. He brought in the men that he trusted. The first thing they did is they freed all of the peasants who had been imprisoned by these nobles, by these politicians. He freed them all. Right? Now, what these people became is they became fighters. They became warriors for the truth. They became the mercenaries that owed their position to him, and they poured in with their weapons drawn. Now, what happened became legend. And this is where the corruption has happened in this legend. And it's where, and it's why I'm doing this particular episode. It's a forgotten piece of history of a Christian versus Muslim war that you were never really told the truth about. Chroniclers, when they talk about this true piece of history, they've always exaggerated, turning dozens of people that he had slayed into hundreds, and then hundreds have turned into thousands. The truth is, we really don't know how many, because the prince himself never wrote down the number. But when the day ended, those politicians, those class of people, those elites that had murdered his family were broken. Those who survived were allowed to do so at his pleasure. Not as independent warlords, not as politicians, but as servants to the community now, that understood their lives were spared only because of his mercy, and that he could end it at any time if he wanted to. But he went even further. He basically sent out the officials through the villages and the towns, and they collected every single thief and criminal. They collected every single judge that was judging based on Islamic law, judges betraying their countrymen. He rounded up all the people that had used their positions as politicians to basically grind the citizens into dust. The punishment for those were swift and terrible. Some of them suffered the noose. Some of them faced the sword. What happened, some of the others suffered an even darker fate because he made an example of them. He gave them a slow, agonizing death that they deserved as a symbol of basically, don't screw with me. Because he knew he had to root out all the evil and corruption. That was the deal. He had to root out all the evil and corruption. Now, one of his people, one of his advisors says, you know, my Lord, this method by which you're doing it, this is feared. This is like the most worst punishment you could ever do, and only barbarians do this. And those warriors to the south, they kind of do this stuff. And why would you be imitating exactly what they do? Why would you be imitating them, like, you know, cutting somebody's head in public like you've seen done by the Muslims? Why would you imitate exactly what you claim to resist? Yeah, he was kind of FAFO, right? The prince basically said, when this plague comes back, because it will, speaking of the Muslims coming out, when this plague comes back from the south, I want to let you know, we're not going to fight it with perfumed linen. We're going to come back meaner, with fire. We're going to speak the language of terror, and I will speak it to them because that's all they know. And so that they learn here, if they cross our border, we're going to be as freaking brutal as them. Of course, his own counselors were kind of freaked out about this. And eventually, no lightning struck because he was doing such horrible things. The distant pounding of hammers and stakes driven into the earth came in. But what it was is the hordes, the plagues coming back again. Right? He knew they would come back. He heard rumors they are coming back. But in his kingdom, he cleaned it up. The merchants began to travel again. Commerce took off again. People knew that if they were robbed, their prince, their ruler, would not spare the robbers. They wouldn't let somebody like's happening now rape a child and go, well, that's just their culture. We're not going to do anything about it. The people stood behind the fact that their prince was going to operate by the rule of law and was just not going to stand for it. He ended the corruption inside the government where widows would collect their due without having to bribe a petty official to get what was them. Peasants, for the first time, slept with their eyes closed. First time in years. See, he reasoned that wolves feared the prince force, the wolves from the south. Bandits feared his justice because he was going to deal out justice. Fuck around and find out, right? They feared his justice even more than they feared God. And so what happened throughout the land, the people got the message. Fuck around and find out. The people began to talk about a leader who was for the people, right? a leader who was do right by the people. Now, it was kind of interesting because they didn't really know to classify him as a tyrant or a savior, because they always, when you're just getting rid of people brutally, they could call him a tyrant, and some did. Most saw him a savior doing what was right because he was being strong for his people. At the bottom line, they knew he was his prince. Now, during that time, as they looked back across that river, right, and trading, the people were pleased. They were complicit. The economy was going great. They could trade in the frontier as long as they remembered who they were loyal to. That's their country and their leader. Well, eventually some letters started coming to the kingdom, written in a very kind of flowing script. They addressed him politely, calling him the beloved son. Yeah, reminding him of his years inside the southern invaders' court. So they had come knocking at the door again. But this time they're addressing him as the beloved son because, they had groomed him all that time. And what they do is they started demanding payments. They wanted the usual payments. They wanted gold, but they wanted more gold now. Even though they'd been raping the community forever, they wanted even more because they thought they had one of their own in that they had broken. And so they wanted more gold, and they wanted more grain, and they wanted more boys. True story. And so the prince read the letters to his court, kind of freaked out his advisors because they knew what it would mean if they didn't agree. They had already experienced it. They were already beaten under a system that says, do not refuse these people. Do not refuse the Sultan because it will be hell. We know what it looks like. And they're his people. Ones who would remember what had happened said, pay. Maybe not forever, but pay for now. Let's bring up our strength first. Others were whispering to him, you need to submit, or at least pretend. Look, we live in a valley between two giants. And we can bow a little. We can capitulate a little bit. It doesn't break the spine, right? Just a little bit. And so the prince, once again, looking around the chamber of the people who were there, people driven by fear, people doing anything to not have chaos. In his own chest, and stomach, he became sickened. Right? When the priest looked around, he saw that the prince was looking around, and he became scared. And the priest says, look, everybody just wants to live one more year here. But it comes to a point that capitulating and paying a price just for another year, and you keep on doing that, just another year, we'll fix it later. Let's just don't argue. Let's election integrity. We don't have to deal with it now. They'll stop. If you capitulate, it's not going to be another year because it's going to mean there will be no more centuries ahead of us. He rose, went to his window, looking out, and ironically, he saw along that river kind of a strip of flags and steel. They were here. He told them, it says, when they take our gold, we can say we will earn no more. When they take our wheat, we can say, well, God will send us another harvest. When they take our sons and turn them into rulers with swords to raise against us, what will we say then? That means we sold our future for a few calm winters, because that's what the Muslim hordes expected when they groomed this kid. And that's what people don't understand. When you capitulate a little and you give them your gold, think of all the welfare going to illegals and Muslims that want to kill us. Think it's okay to rape our children. But people don't want to imprison them, which is going on right now. Don't want to imprison them because we don't want to rile them up. Basically, for a little bit of calm, we're selling our future. And so he basically said, this river, this is the line. This border is our home. And he said, we're not doing this anymore. We will not sell our children, etc. So this kind of pissed off the Muslims who had gotten used to this nation capitulating. Right? And so the threats from the Muslims went from this little nice tone to getting harder and meaner and harder and meaner, and saying to the prince, who was a boy that was kidnapped, you are one of us. You are a vassal of Sultan. You must obey. A son must obey his father. That's what he was taught, that the Sultan was his father now. The prince replied with courtesy, but it was an act of open defiance. He stopped the tribute to the caravans. He stopped it, put an end to it. He tightened his own defenses. He sent raiding parties across the river at night into those lands. He burned their outposts. He burned their depots where they had spies. He freed all of the Christian captives that he could. Sometimes his men returned with prisoners. And if even his own forces, right? What would happen is when his forces came back with these Muslim prisoners, he would basically, this prince would show him what he did to his own people. He would show them. And he told them, you go back to your master and you tell them what you saw. And you tell your master, we will not be domesticated like dogs. And if he wants this land, he must come and take it himself. They took that message because here was this guy that cleaned out his freaking kingdom. Somebody said it'd make a good movie. You're right. It is a good movie that it would make. And so from that moment on, the empire got pissed off. So the whole empire turned their rage onto this very small, very obstinate principality, just a little bitty spit of earth, right, that seemed to be shifting everything. And so the Sultan put his columns of infantry, his cavalry with lances, right, wagons of supplies, siege engines, engineers, scribes, slaves. They crossed that river, beating their drums, signaling, because they do a lot of signaling up front, a lot of threats. Threats is part of this, as you see even in our own society. But they're threats. They're bad. They're going to kill you, whatever. The prince was smart, though. He knew he could not engage them in battle. He knew he couldn't get out and engage them in battle, in open battle, and live, because his own forces were small. His city, though, was ringed, it was protected, it was thick enough to withstand a siege. And so what the prince decided to do, because he had learned their ways, he understood these people. He had spent all that time being raped and abused and beaten to death. And so what he did is he decided to turn his own land into a weapon. And so what happened is he ordered all of the near border villages emptied out. They drove away all the cattle, so there was no food. They fouled all of the wells, so there would be no water when the hordes arrived. He burned all of the granaries, so there would be no food for them. His own peasants, they fled, and he told them to flee, right? Flee to the mountains and the forests where you can hide. Take everything you can carry. Of course, they begged for mercy, but he knew he had to fight this hard if they were going to be free, because he knew personally to submit, right? To feed the invader, which would have been the alternative, take what you have and feed the invader. It still wouldn't have gone to the peasants, right? Because the invaders would have let them starve. He said, not going to do it. He sent out a message to all the bordering Christian powers. He was begging for aid. Promises came. Soldiers did not. The kings to the north, the kings to the west were busy with their own wars, their own political sabotage going on. Some of them wished him well. They did it on paper. Others quietly hoped that his empire would fall. Think of other countries. We hope Trump fails because he's stirring up too much. He's making it worse. Well, they hoped that he would fall because at least it would stop stirring things up. The prince knew, he understood. See, he had grown up in a world where people didn't value life. He had grown up in a world where their smiles were stretched over knives. They were killers. And so the first thing that happened is the first enemy scouts came to the frontier. So now the enemy scouts for the Muslims are coming to take a look. And all they saw was charred ruins, empty fields, and of course they called the prince a coward because he destroyed everything. When the Muslims came in and they pushed their army into the land, the thinner their supply got. Now, this should resonate with you like USAID. You got to cut off the money. He cut off their supplies way deep in the territory. He cut it off where it was really coming from. And so by the time they saw it, they thought he was a coward. But as they're marching inland and coming into it, the thinner and thinner and thinner their supply lines were. Now, because of their own conditions, plagues kind of followed them like a shadow. And the prince basically started doing skirmishes with small bands. He would strike at night, then he would disappear into the gullies, into the thickets that he knew from his boyhood, right? He ordered all the bridges destroyed. He ordered all of the fords and the water clogged, roads torn up. Yes, he knew he was only delaying the inevitable, but he had to start dismantling access. He had to start dismantling how even these own armies were filled with his own money and were coming to destroy him, just the way his NGOs are fueling our enemies. I told you history repeats itself. One night, they arrived. The enemy camp, right? City of tents and torches and campfires, making streets out of tents. The drums had gone silent. The horses kind of just stamped, like an old Western movie, and snorted and stuff in the night. And the warriors slept. And so this prince, what he did is he gathered his chosen men, warriors, real warriors, loyal, trust, that their nerves were made of iron. Their faith was deep. With these men, priests that were still loyal, walked among them. Confessions were heard. Everybody was prepared to die. They were given absolution. They knelt on the dust of a church floor because the churches have been destroyed. And the churches, basically gave these men absolution, says, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory gave him. Then the prince spoke and he says, tonight we walk in the valley of shadow. We will be outnumbered beyond counting. Many of us will not see dawn. But remember this, we do not go as thieves. We go as men defending the flock God has given us. And he said, it's better to die by the sword of your hand in the name of Christ on your lips than to live as cattle under the yoke of those who have denied God. So up from the hills, he studied the enemy camps. He knew exactly where the command camps stood, where the command tents were. He knew how to read the banners because the time with them. He knew where the most important officers was. And his plan was in simple, almost insane, right? He would carve his kind of way creeping through there to the heart of the camp, and they would strike the Sultan's pavilion. They go right for the heart of the beast. He basically said, if we can, kill the emperor of the Crescent, that would send a message far stronger than numbers of people we kill would. And so that's what they did. So they painted crosses and shields on their helmet, not bright, not shining symbols, but just kind of marks to say we're fighting for God. They did that mainly so they could mark themselves, so they could be recognized by each other fighting in the night, so they wouldn't, accidentally kill each other, friendly fire, and they rode into the dark. Now, what happened as I bring this to a conclusion for you, this battle, this man has been talked about forever. There's epic songs made about him. It's been told and retold. It's been told as a legend, even as it's just incredible or whatever. And throughout this, people have come to remember it. They just don't understand the real story behind it, which is why I'm telling you the real story behind it. And so what they did is they crushed through the outer ring of sentries, ripping the night apart. They got to the empire's camp. They secured it in size and reputation, and all confusion broke out because the Sultan's being attacked. So men kind of stumbled from their tents, and as they stumbled from their tents, they were killed. Tents were caught fires. These little narrow alleys of tents now became tunnels of flame. The prince led with his sword. You can imagine it kind of flickering in the red flare of the fire and stuff. Twice he broke through enemy lines to the inner line of guards, close enough to see the silks of the high command quarters. And twice he was nearly surrounded, but he carved his way out again, leaving heaping bodies behind. Unfortunately, he did not reach the Sultan himself. The imperial guard for the Sultan held. Fresh troops poured in. And once again, he's facing insurmountable odds. At last, bleeding from several wounds, he kind of blew the signal, the horn, to withdraw. His riders, those who still lived, they tore themselves free, got back to him, surrounding him, straight back into the night, leaving behind a camp that would never sleep easily again. So when morning came, the Muslim Empire, you got to imagine, somebody fought back. They were shaken. They hadn't been destroyed, and their numbers were still immense. But what they couldn't understand is how someone knew their shit, knew where the Sultan was. And in that mark, they basically understood, if they'll go after the Sultan, if they'll go out after the commanders, nobody's safe. And what they realized was this Christian prince fighting under his God was willing to walk into their very heart like a knife. So they begin to get some fear against them, but it still wasn't enough. And so the prince gave them something they would never forget. And so the prince, in preparations, he knew in order to win, he was going to have to battle them psychologically. He began to prepare something monstrous. He began to basically send a message to these Muslim invaders, fuck around and find out. So what he did is he rounded up all of the prisoners they had taken, all of the deserters, all the spies, all the captured raiders from all the previous skirmishes, all of the people that had betrayed him, his people as well, all of the people that were caught spying for the enemies, trying to get him eliminated, trying to impeach him over and over and over amongst his own people that were either hoarding supplies or aiding and abetting the enemy. He gathered them all up. Now, normally what he would do is, they would just be hung or their heads cut off. But what he chose to do, he chose to speak the language of his enemies. Remember, they need fear and chaos. It's what we're in today. They need fear and chaos to conquer. And so instead of hanging people by the rope or by the axe or whatever, cutting off the head, he spoke their language. Remember, he'd already done this by burning his own frontier. The Muslim hordes knew that if he's willing to clean house internally, if he's willing to do this to his own people, imagine what the hell he would do to us. And so this prince prepared the final message for the Muslim hordes. No, he didn't offer pig roast or bacon. What he began to do is he ordered his men to cut tall, sturdy trees, about yay round, peel the bark, sharpen the point. He instructed them to dig pits and erect the poles. The priests were horrified. And he spared no one that betrayed them. Even the priest says, don't you pity them? Don't you pity them? These are, don't do this. And he basically said, I don't pity any of them. The priest pushed back on him and said, this is not what God intended you to do. The prince said, God also didn't intend for other nations to go devouring other nations. And if I could stop them alone by praying or psalms alone, I would. But that doesn't stop them. And so what happened is as the work was done and the Muslims invaders came in and they're heading towards the capital, to punish the prince and to take over, something struck them. It struck them that it really stopped them in their tracks. It freaking stopped them in their tracks, because what they were looking at is bodies hanging everywhere, their limbs twisted, their faces contorted, incredible misery. Some had died quickly, others lingered for on. Some were still moaning because they hadn't died. And by the time the empire's vanguard, which protects the Sultan, got there and they saw it, literally, they screamed at the sight. Men who had kind of ridden through these dozen campaigns, right? They were recognizing their own rebels that were flayed. They stopped, in fear, recognizing their own people there put on display. Then the stench of all the death and destruction hit them, crows in the air, buzzards, everything else circling and cawing. And they reported to their superiors what they'd seen. Not only had this man murdered brutally the people they counted on to keep their rules, he had done it to her soldiers. And so this image to the Muslim hordes looked like a curse. The Sultan himself is said to have looked upon it and paused. And it struck fear in him. And he basically said, I'm not going to fuck around and find out. Now, all of this death brought disease, etc. They were already out of supplies because they couldn't rape and pillage anything because their own ruler had destroyed it, expecting them. They expected it to be an easy campaign. These guys roll over. And they found out they were actually marching through hell. They never came back. Never came back. The next year or the other. Never. You know this story. You just don't know what really behind the name. You don't know really what he was fighting for. You don't know that he was fighting back Muslim hordes. You don't know that he refused to capitulate. He was not going to surrender his God. He was not going to let his borders invaded. He was the only one that had defied the Ottoman power over the Muslim sultans. He was a Christian warrior. His story is remembered. He even became feared as a monster. This man is the man that's come to you as Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, now known to you by the stolen name of Dracula. And now you know the real story of Dracula, who he really was, what he really fought for, and why through legends he became a monster. He never was a monster. He was a man that refused to offer up his people. He was a man that refused to capitulate. He was a man that basically says this shit stops now. And here you know him hundreds and hundreds of years later. But history has turned it into entertainment, telling you Dracula was the devil himself. Because truly, to the Muslims, Dracul, the order of his dragon, which his father was, basically said, we're not standing for this. We stand for our nation. We stand for our borders. You must have trust and loyalty. This politicking shit, selling us over to people, never capitulates, and I'm not willing to lose my culture and be absorbed. And if it means I die in battle, fine, but I will not die on my knees. And now you know the real story that you have come to know of the person as Dracula, because his history was rewritten in a way to divert you from what it really was about. And boy, that's some crazy shit. I'll remind you, we're fighting this same war. We're fighting this same invasion. We just use different tools to fight it, and we need your support. I love you all. Share this program.
Our courts are based on clear and convincing evidence. Want convictions? Want justice? For what happened in the 2020 election? then we need your help. Not fixing 2020 will damn our nation forever. The decision you make in the next few moments could decide whether we ever get our elections fixed or not. Here's why. Trump campaign and allies file 64 different lawsuits. They all went down in flames. 100% of these cases were presented on "It's the machines," or "The machines changed the votes," or "The voting company executive said he would make sure Donald J. Trump would not win." They all went down in flames. Why? You can't bring theories to court as evidence. No supposed Zoom call or six-degree polynomial math theory or census data is or ever will be proof of fraud. You can't bring theories to court as evidence. Here's why. In both civil and criminal law, the side making a claim carries the burden of proof, and prosecutors must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Without physical or otherwise verifiable evidence, a case cannot meet this high threshold. Physical evidence is the key. The question is, did anyone get relevant, reliable, provable, testable, and duplicatable evidence of what really happened in the 2020 general election? And the answer is yes, absolutely. The full forensic audit of Maricopa County, Arizona is the only evidence-gathering work which gathered relevant, reliable, provable, testable, and duplicatable evidence of what really happened in the 2020 general election. Evidence so damning that the system, the deep state, and those who pull the strings of this country have fought to keep it hidden and have hoped to have it be forgotten to time. Almost $3 million invested in time, funds, and efforts to unlock that which the system wanted hidden. But now, that evidence is in danger of being lost forever. So if you want what happened in the 2020 election fixed, then we need your help. Please donate to protect and secure this historic evidence. With the 2026 midterms coming up, the system is going to try to lame duck President Trump and then most likely introduce new impeachment proceedings. This is the evidence which will help win the war which is surely to come. We need to keep Maricopa County full forensic investigation and archive secure and ongoing. So if you want what happened in the 2020 election fixed, then we need your help. Please donate to protect and secure this historic evidence. We need your help securing the full forensic audit archives. Don't allow the only testable, objective, and reliable 2020 election evidence fall into obscurity. Millions were spent on getting it documented and tested. This is historic evidence. Not fixing 2020 will damn our nation forever. The historic Maricopa County full forensic audit effort processed 20,895,610 digital and forensic images of varying formats, resulted in 208 million individual evidence-proof files. The system processed over 58 billion forensic measurements, resulting in over 2 trillion individual base computations. No hopium, no hype, just hardcore forensic evidence. Please make sure the Maricopa County full forensic audit archives survive. Donate now. So if you want what happened in the 2020 election fixed, then please donate to protect and secure this historic evidence. We can't do it without you. We need you. America needs you. Our future needs you. Please donate now. Not fixing 2020 will damn our nation forever. Please donate now.